students, I welcome you all to my today's session, which will be on an introduction to the classical sociological thought. And in this lecture, I will be talking about the contribution of Max Weber. Max Weber is one of the most eminent thinkers and most significant names of the 19th century Europe. And he left a lasting legacy on social science in general and sociology in particular. Like most of his contemporaries, his works span across a range of fields such as economic history, historical sociology, comparative sociology, sociology of law, sociology of religion, and comparative religion. Some of his most celebrated and notable works include The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, which was originally published in 1904, Economy and Society, which was originally published in 1915, Basic Concept in Sociology, which was translated in 1962, The Religion of China, Confucianism and Taoism, which was translated in 1951. I will now talk about his biography. So, Max Weber, he was born in Germany, in Erfurt, and he was born in a well-off, educated and influential family, and his father was a bureaucrat. And he was a very important figure in the contemporary German politics of the time. His mother, on the other hand, was from a very distinguished and educated family as well, but she was also a devout Protestant, and she had a religious orientation in her personal life, and but she led an ascetic life. Weber studied economic history and law and philosophy at the universities of Heidelberg, Berlin and Göttingen. He started his career as a law professor at the University of Berlin and later became a professor of economics at the University of Heidelberg. The mature part of Weber's life is marked by his proneness to and periodic attacks of mental illness. And this is something which is very significant to note about the life of Weber. He suffered from mental illness, anxiety and depression, which in fact compelled him to withdraw from his professional role in 1899 and only to return back in 1902. But briefly, after a period of 1 year, again, he had to withdraw himself, and he could only return back to academics in 1919. Another important thing to mention about Weber, about his life, is that apart from his academic writings, Weber was also very much involved with the contemporary politics and political developments, though he never actively took part in politics. What he did is to abundantly write on political issues of the time. Now we move over to some of his contributions to social science in general. I will be talking about three major segments as part of his contribution to sociology. The first segment will be about methodology and his contribution to methodology. The second segment will be about his contribution to political sociology. And here I will talk about the three forms of authority that he talks about. And finally, the third segment will deal with the sociology of religion and its contribution to sociology of religion. And here I will focus on one of his most celebrated works, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. So let's begin with the first part, which is about methodology. First is Verstehen, or something which can be translated as interpretive understanding. And the second thing that I will be talking about his notion of ideal type. So let's begin with what is Verstehen. The German word Verstehen is often translated as interpretive understanding. What does this term indicate? The need for interpretation in understanding the meaning of social actions. Giddens and Turner define Verstehen as, and I quote, empathic understanding of the outlook and feelings of others. In other words, Weber emphasized that a sociologist should understand social action by penetrating to the subjective meanings that human beings attach to their own behavior and action. In other words, this approach means is that the sociologist has to place oneself into the shoes of others to understand the meaning of their action and behavior. This stress on understanding the meaning of action from the standpoint of those who are being studied is something that gave rise to an entire paradigm of thought, which is called interpretive paradigm. So the interpretive paradigm in sociology is a paradigm which emerged in opposition to another paradigm which was dominant during that time, which was propagated by thinkers like Comte, Spencer, Durkheim, etc. As opposed to positivism, interpretive paradigm emphasized studying social phenomena from the subjective viewpoint of the people, and they did not think of social phenomena as something which can be studied as external object. So that is the basic idea of Verstehen. Now, ideal type is defined as a concept constructed by a social scientist on the basis of his or her interest and theoretical orientation to capture the essential features of some phenomena. And this I quote from Ritzer and Stefnisky. So what is an ideal type? To put it in another way, ideal type is a tool which is constructed by a social scientist. It is basically a theoretical tool which is useful, however, for doing empirical research. What is the purpose of construction of this ideal type? According to Weber, it is constructed for the purpose of comparison. Basically, to understand the essential features of a social phenomena, and then on the basis of that, to understand the deviations from that ideal construction. So to give you an example, Weber says that we can have an ideal type construction of bureaucracy. So ideal type bureaucracy, according to Weber, has some features. But in empirical reality, bureaucracy may deviate from these ideal characteristics. So some of the ideal type characteristics of bureaucracy would include, according to Weber, hierarchy of authority. So bureaucracy is an institution where there is a clear-cut hierarchy of authority. Second, it represents a very neat specialization of tasks. That is, there is a division of labor. Third, there is impersonality, which means that it is governed by impersonal rules. Impersonal rules and regulations guide the operation of bureaucratic institutions. It is guided by a set of written rules. And finally, promotion is purely based on a criteria of achievement. Now, Weber argues that while these are the essential features of an ideal type bureaucracy, in reality, the bureaucracy may fail to show all of these ideal characteristics for a number of reasons. And therefore, in reality, they may not actually mirror all the characteristics that I have mentioned right now. Coming to some of the features of ideal type bureaucracy. Firstly, ideal type is to be derived inductively from the real world. Thus, though itself it is a theoretical construction, it is actually based on empirical reality and more specifically historical reality. Second, though ideal types are derived from the real world, they are not mirror images of the world. And what happens in an ideal type construction is that there are exaggerations of the essence of what goes in the real world. So Weber believed that the more the ideal type is exaggerated, it would be more useful for historical research. The third aspect that he talks about, and this is important to note, the word ideal in ideal type does not mean this term in the moral sense or in the sense of being best or correct, but it is something which is simply representing the essence of something, a sense of a social phenomena. Finally, Weber emphasized that ideal type should not be developed once and for all because society is constantly changing and it is necessary therefore to develop typologies to fit this changing reality. So he was necessarily not in favor of developing universal, timeless concepts. He also talks about certain varieties of ideal types. First is what he calls historical ideal types. These relate to phenomena which are found in particular historical period. For example, the capitalist marketplace, which is found only in the modern phase of history, in the modern phase of Western civilization. Secondly, he talks about what he calls the general sociological ideal types. These relate to phenomena that cut across a number of historical periods and societies. Basically, something like a social institution such as the bureaucracy. The third, he talks about action ideal types. This is some variety that is based on types of action and the motivation of the actors. For example, he talks about something called affectual action. Affectual means something which is based on emotion. Actions which are based on emotions. And fourthly, he talks about structural ideal types. These are forms taken by the causes and consequences of social action. So, for example, traditional domination. Which is Weber's contribution to political sociology. And here, I will talk about the three forms of authority structures that he distinguishes. What are these? Rational legal authority, traditional authority, and finally, charismatic authority. We should first define and understand what is authority and how does Weber define authority. So before we define authority, we need to define how Weber understands domination. And what is the definition of domination that he gives? Domination is defined as the probability that certain specific commands or all commands will be obeyed by a given group of persons. Domination can have a variety of bases, legitimate as well as illegitimate. According to Weber, authority is a legitimate form of domination. Coming to rational legal authority, that is the first kind that he talks about. Rational legal authority is the most important form of authority in modern societies. Here, authority is based on rational grounds. There are certain features of rational authority. It rests on the belief on the legality of certain impersonal rules and regulations, and these rules are applicable to everyone. Those who have authority under such rules can issue commands, but they are themselves not outside the purview of the framework of rules and regulations. Coming to traditional authority, it is based on traditional grounds. It is based on an established belief in the sanctity of age-old traditions and the legitimacy of those exercising authority within that setup. The leader in such a system is not a supervisor but a personal master. And the relationship between the administrative staff to the master is determined by personal loyalty. Examples of this form of authority is that of feudal lords or tribal chiefs. There are certain characteristics of traditional authority. Firstly, here, the administrative staff lacks offices, and they also do not require specific competences, and they're not subject to impersonal rules. Also, it lacks clear-cut hierarchy, and there is no rational ordering of superior-inferior. Also, there is no regular system of appointment or promotion. Also, there is no technical training needed for employment, and appointments do not have fixed salaries paid in monetary terms. Weber talks about three major forms of traditional authority: gerontocracy, primary patriarchalism or patrimonialism, and feudalism. Gerontocracy involves rule by elders, such as in tribal societies. Primary patriarchalism involves leaders who inherit their positions based on patriarchal system. They have a supreme chief but lack an administrative staff. A more modern form of primary patriarchalism is patrimonialism, which is traditional domination with an administration and a military force. And a still modern form is that of feudalism, which represents the development of routinized and contractual relationships between leaders and subordinates. We come to charismatic authority. Charismatic authority is based on the charisma of particular persons who emerge as leaders. It rests on the devotion of the followers to the exceptional qualities of a leader, exemplary character, heroism, and some special powers such as the ability to do miracles. Examples of such authority include that exercised by religious prophets or revolutionary leaders. Some of the features of charismatic authority involves charismatic authority can never be a stable system of political rule. Weber believed that this form of authority is not suited to managing routine affairs. Rather, it is suited to periods of unusual demands, unrest, and upheavals. However, charismatic authority may be a source of revolutionary force and struggle. The third important characteristics that he talks about, it is the only pure form of legitimate authority because it rests solely on the voluntary faith of the followers in the leader. Certain other characteristics of charismatic authority are, since it solely rests on the charismatic power of the individuals, his or her ability to convince a set of followers is very important. The leader may actually need to continually prove his or her extraordinary powers, and these are under perpetual review. And now we come to the third and the final segment of the discussion today, which is on Weber's contribution to sociology of religion. In one of his most celebrated works, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, Weber sought to establish a relationship between religion, that is Protestantism, and the emergence of Western capitalism. He argued that there is an affinity between the spirit of capitalism, that is modern Western capitalism, and the ethics of Protestantism. More specifically, a particular sect of Protestantism, that is Calvinism, that emerged in the 16th century Europe. What is the spirit of capitalism? Weber defines it in a specific way. He defines the spirit of capitalism as a new ethos which emerged and emphasized on the importance of earning money, but avoidance of all forms of material enjoyment with it. Calvinism promoted what he identifies as inner-worldly asceticism, which was different from otherworldly orientation of the previous Catholic religious sect. Unlike monastic asceticism, such conception does not require the ascetic to distance himself from worldly activities. Two important doctrines of Calvinism include the doctrine of God's transcendence and the individual's predestination. According to the doctrine of predestination, an individual did not know in his life whether he will be saved or damned, and he could not alter his destination, which was decided before he was born. Now, Weber argues the psychological uncertainty that the doctrine of predestination gave rise to led them to commit themselves to self-discipline. Hard work was seen as a sign of election, instead of any fatalistic resignation or a cultivated indifference toward his own fate. Now, to talk about the notion of transcendental God, according to Calvinism, there exists an absolute transcendental God who created the world and rules it, and who is incomprehensible, inaccessible to the finite minds of men. There is no way a finite human being can establish a connection with God. The idea of transcendental God meant that Calvinists were less oriented to institutionalize ritual practices of Catholic religion. Relieved of such preoccupations, they could now concentrate on their mundane activities of everyday life with an emphasis on their calling. And now I come to the conclusion of today's lecture. This lecture has dealt with some of the most significant contributions of Max Weber. 3 themes have been selected here for discussion: his methodology of social sciences, his contribution to the field of political sociology, focusing on the typology of authority structures, and finally his contribution to sociology of religion. Coming to the theoretical relevance of Weber's thinking, I must mention that his approach was distinctive from Marx and Durkheim, the 2 other most significant classical thinkers who shaped sociology. While Marx's framework is often labeled as critical theory and that of Durkheim as positivism, Weber developed his distinctive paradigm called interpretive sociology, which influenced generations of later theorists and schools of thought such as phenomenology, symbolic interactionism, and social constructivism. Max Weber remains as one of the most eminent thinkers of the 19th century, with an extraordinarily long-lasting legacy continuing even today. Thank you for listening, and I will meet you all again for my next session. Thank you.